Hello and welcome to PFF Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm your host, Ian Hartitz, and today we continue our mini positional series with a look at wide receivers and people. I got the best guest I could for this position. Like, it's not even up for debate. You heard him last year, returning guest. He told you just how special the artist known as AJ Brown was in July before all the casuals had to find out in September. You can find his writing and analysis over at Yahoo Sports, creator of Reception Perception, which people, truly, if you don't know what this is, one of the best metrics for grading wide receivers that you can find. Matt Harmon, who you can follow on Twitter at Matt Harmon _BYB. Matt, welcome back. Thanks for the time, brother.
Ian, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. Now, this is always a good time to chop it up with you. And, it's crazy, man. Things are changing every single minute. It feels like here in August, we've got Sony Michel freak out. Like, I did not see that one coming. I did not see Sony Michel being the main character of fantasy Twitter here in the middle of August, or the end of August, basically. Like, I did not see that one coming, but no, it's good to talk receivers with you here, man. It's such a fun position. So, not just deep throughout the draft, but especially deep at the top of the draft this year, man. It is. If you got to know about receivers, man, this is the year to do it.
And one of the things that I love about your receiver analysis is you do a good job separating like which guys are great in fantasy, great in real life, both. Maybe one's up, maybe one's down. Like, I think too many people just see a guy's fantasy points and they're like, oh, okay, that guy sucks then. And that's not the whole story. You do a great job going route by route. The charts are fantastic. Truly, people, receptionperception.com. You're going to get more knowledge on wide receivers than just about anywhere else. And Matt, sticking with that theme, look, consensus, big five fantasy receivers: Davante Adams, Tyreek Hill, Stephon Diggs, DeAndre Hopkins, Calvin Ridley. People want to mess up the order. That's fine. Those are the big five. With that said, if you're starting an NFL franchise tomorrow, Matt Harmon is given the keys to the entire squad. Which one of these receivers would you want on the team if you could only pick one?
Man, yeah, those top three especially. And for me this year in fantasy, I actually have our guy AJ Brown at 5 ahead of DeAndre Hopkins at 6 this year. So a little spicy there. But I mean, that tier 1 in fantasy, I think, is ironically that tier that you're going to want to pluck from if you're starting an NFL franchise from scratch. Diggs, Adams, Tyreek Hill, that's the order that I have them in for fantasy this year. And I actually think that's probably the order I would have them in for real life too. For Tyreek Hill, it's tough because is there a scarier proposition for a defense than defending Tyreek Hill? I don't know. I mean, I doubt it, because we saw, I think that first Bucs game during the regular season, that was like the perfect example. And, people think of Tyreek Hill as just a guy who is all speed and all athleticism. But, I'm actually one of the, as you mentioned with reception perception, the real goal of RP is to isolate the receiver as much as possible from the outside variables and really hone in on their route running ability. And Tyreek Hill was a guy that way back in 2016, it's crazy to think about this now, but people were comparing him to, like, coming out of his rookie year as a gadget guy, like, well, he could end up being like the next Cordero Patterson or Tavon Austin or something like that. And I know this is a pro Cordero Patterson show with you here, Ian, but I mean, at this point, it's like crazy to think that those were real concerns. And reception perception actually showed, like, in the limited looks as a route runner we got, he actually was really good there as a separator in his rookie year. And that kind of has just progressed here throughout the rest of his career. He's actually number 5 in success rate versus press coverage last year in reception perception. But if I'm starting a franchise from day one, I'm going to go with the guy who was number 1 against press last year, was number 1 against man coverage, 82.6% success rate for Stephon Diggs. That was the best in reception perception history dating back to 2014. I think he is a full field player, separates at every level, also was number 1 in contested catch rate for us last year. He's just a stud. He wins deep, he wins short, wins intermediate. He does everything you want. It's crazy actually in fantasy that there's yet another ceiling that he could access if he boosts that touchdown rate up, which is certainly possible from just 4.8%. So I love Diggs, man. And I am, as a long time believer, this is actually the second season where Diggs has led the league in success rate versus man coverage. So as a longtime Diggs guy, I'm happy to have that as like a legitimate take I could have, that he's the number 1 receiver in the NFL right now.
Man, a year ago this time, people were just even wondering if he could be, if he was going to be a number 1 wide receiver with the trade and the history.
Right.
Obviously, those concerns have been calmed in a major way. So great stuff there. And the only other point I'd add with like Tyreek, the route running's there, and so is the ball tracking ability, man. Like, we just assume all these deep threats have like D-Jack's ability to go get under the thing. I remember, I think it was Hill's like first game back when he was injured in 2019, and they said, maybe he'll be limited snaps. Like first drive, free play. Mahomes chucks it, double coverage, and he'll just skies up above him. Like he can do everything you want. Yeah. Like, DeAnthony Thomas, I think, was one of the players where people are saying, oh, is Hill just another one of these guys?
No, oh man, even tough scene. He really is like Steve Smith at the catch point is kind of the comparison that I put out there. Like he's got that my ball mentality for a smaller player. And just let's also mention Davante Adams too, as a guy that I think is right up there with Tyreek Hill and right up there with Stephon Diggs. I'd actually put him second behind Diggs if I'm starting a team. And, he's a guy that's one of the best separators in the NFL, sixth against press coverage, second against man coverage last year, just a total stud in his own right. So I didn't want to leave the conversation with also not giving some credit to Davante Adams as well.
When I see that like wide receiver cornerback ISO replay after a Davante Adams catch, I just get nervous for the cornerback. I'm like, what are we about to see here? Where
this poor guy.
All right. Back into the fantasy world a little bit more here. CeeDee Lamb hype train, absolutely out of control. Dwayne McFarland and myself did talk about on the Wednesday edition of this podcast, though. He is now seemingly starting in 2 wide receiver sets alongside Amari Cooper, was mostly playing strictly from the slot last year, but there is still Cooper there. And we got Michael Gallup on the outside. Unfortunately, just 1 ball per play, official NFL rules, if you didn't realize that. Matt, where do you fall on each of Lamb, Cooper, and Gallup ahead of 2021? Do you think there could be enough production for all 3 of these guys to ball out?
I think so. And I think the fact that they're moving these players around is actually pretty key for the projection for all 3 of these guys. And for CeeDee Lamb, it's obvious because, as you mentioned, he was like a 90+% slot guy last year, but reception perception would show you that he could absolutely thrive on the outside. 72.5% success rate versus man, 80% success rate versus press, and very limited looks. Like actually, when you look at the coverages he faced and the routes he ran, his role was kind of almost similar to like Cooper Kupp out in LA. And we would not really think of those 2 guys as like comparable at all. So I would love to see Lamb move more to that outside perimeter guy, a player that can win vertically. I absolutely believe he could be a deep threat, intermediate threat, a short threat as well. Like he's a full field player to me. I have him comfortably ranked as the top receiver on the Dallas roster heading into this year, because I just think there's a chance that by the end of this season, we're all in consensus agreement that, he's just a better player than Amari Cooper. That's the ceiling that I believe this guy has. Cooper, I still have, very comfortably ranked as like wide receiver 17, a guy I'm totally comfortable taking in the early rounds, because I do believe there's enough production for all these guys. But the trickle down to Michael Gallup, who I think is one of the biggest values in fantasy right now, is huge, because Gallup last year ran the most routes against press coverage on the team because he's that outside perimeter X receiver. And I think Gallup's a really underrated player, good separator, always been strong in reception perception, but he just has to run the most difficult routes on the team as that ISO X receiver on the vast majority of his snaps. If Lamb is going to take some of those perimeter looks, and Gallup is going to get to move more inside, or Cooper's going to get to move more inside, and Gallup's going to get to play more flanker, I actually think that evens out the production for all 3 of these guys. I think you have to kind of comfortably rank Lamb and Cooper a little bit ahead of Gallup because they're the top 2 receivers, most likely in 2 wide receiver sets they're going to play there. But, coming out of that, I think Gallup is still very, very underrated in fantasy right now. Man,
the Gallup free agency, just chase next year if he ends up hitting the open market. I can just already picture myself, tweeting out, please get Michael Gallup to the Packers like tomorrow. So we'll see what happens there. Yeah, it's interesting, man. I have had Cooper 1 spot ahead of CeeDee throughout the offseason. I just think Cooper can hold on to it for 1 more year. Dynasty land, it's not even close. So I'm looking at Cooper's contract right now. And I know he got that $100 million from the Cowboys over 5 years. Like most contracts, though, they can actually get out quite a bit earlier. Not a guarantee Cooper will be back next year. Obviously, CeeDee still has quite some time. We're talking redraft here, Matt, but looking at dynasty, it's got to be AJB, Jefferson, CeeDee, top 3, right? I can't think of anyone else that should really be in that group.
Yeah, I mean, guys like Adams and Diggs and even Tyreek Hill are young enough and they're good enough, and they already have proven that alpha profile that it's tough to not have them in that conversation. But yeah, those guys, the 3 you mentioned, Jefferson especially, I think had just such an unbelievable rookie season. Obviously, from a production angle, we know that part of it. That's easy to spot. But even from a reception perception angle, he was number 2, actually, ironically, only trailing Stephon Diggs, number 2 in success rate versus press coverage last year. Lucky that the Vikings got a little bit of a blessing there with the Eagles deciding not to take Justin Jefferson. Could you imagine if the Eagles had just taken Justin Jefferson and the Vikings didn't have him, they would actually really not look great with that Stephon Diggs trade. So it's good to be good. It's better to be even a little bit lucky there as well. So, but Justin Jefferson is a stone cold baller, number 2 in success rate versus press coverage. No questions about him as a player. No question about sustainability. And Brown, I'm tempted to have him as the number 1 receiver in Dynasty, man, just because I think he has that unbelievable ceiling in his range of outcomes. And we have barely kind of seen him scratch that so far. And, people think of him as just like a big after catch threat or a big contested catch guy, but he was number 3, in success rate versus man coverage last year. He showed that he can get open deep, short, intermediate. Like there's no coverage that AJ Brown can't beat. He's a true full field separator. So I think he right now would be my number 1 receiver in Dynasty. That is how hard I'm willing to buy this player.
Absolutely criminal. AJ Brown only has 6 career games with more than 8 targets. Give that dude a legit 150.
I know, right?
Ceiling is the freaking roof, people. All right, Matt. I know this guy's been one of your favorites as well. Allen Robinson. He's made the most out of bad quarterbacks throughout his NFL and collegiate career alike. So we have Andy Dalton and Justin Fields coming in. And if you wanted to say those are the best quarterbacks ever played with, I wouldn't disagree. You could also say, damn, man, he's got 2 more quarterbacks to adjust to at this point. Seemingly the way Nagy's been doing it, Fields isn't even he just now maybe got some reps with the first team receivers. Again, I know A-Rob in terms of what a receiver can do and all the route running ability to get open, few are better than him. Are you worried at all about, and just worried a little bit, enough to maybe fade him as a top 12 option, though, going to 2021 with the quarterback changes? It could be an upgrade. We did see him bust that one time at Bortles, as great as he was the one time other.
Right. Yeah. As you mentioned, unbelievable route runner, first in 2019 in success rate versus man, number 4 last year. So only the best of the best sustain that number year over year. And I think Robinson has gotten to the point where he is one of those elite receivers in the NFL on an individual basis. Yeah, it's tough, man. Longtime Robinson guys like me were literally gritting our teeth in March. Andy Dalton is the best quarterback Allen Robinson has ever played with, after one calendar year ago going, well, Nick Foles is the best quarterback Allen Robinson's ever played with. And
I absolutely said those words about Nick Foles. I remember.
Yeah, 100%. Me too. Again, through gritted teeth, but they were still out there. And I do think the fact that we've seen Robinson finish as a top 12 option the last 2 years, when really, I think if I'm going to give Matt Nagy credit for something, and I actually think he's kind of underrated as a play caller. I definitely think he puts himself into some brain pretzels sometimes. Obviously the fact that it was partially his call to go out and get Nick Foles, that's a knock you're going to have against him. Nagy's definitely not perfect as a coach, but as a play caller or play designer, I think one of the things that they've done really well with Allen Robinson is they've had him run a bunch of slants, some more short routes when, they didn't have a good offensive line, when Mitchell Trubisky was just trying to get the ball out really quickly. And I think that's really kept his floor afloat. So I think you still have to rank him comfortably inside the top 12 at the wide receiver position. It's just, what is the ceiling? If we were going to rank Allen Robinson with a good quarterback, no question about it. If Justin Fields was going to come in week 1 and hit the ground running, we'd probably put Allen Robinson in that AJ Brown, Calvin Ridley group, up there close to the top 5, around that DeAndre Hopkins neighborhood. But because we don't have that full field confidence, I think you've got to kind of put him back towards 9 to 11, because we know the ceiling is still there, but the fact that he could access, or that the floor is still there, but it's about accessing the ceiling. And we do need Justin Fields to do that. I don't think Andy Dalton is getting Allen Robinson to that ceiling. He might keep his floor afloat, but he's not to mention that he's always a guy that they work to get open and he works to get himself open, but he is such a great ball winner as well that I think quarterbacks do just come to trust and rely on him. And I always kind of hate the argument of who else are they going to throw the ball to, but as much as I like Darnell Mooney as a sleeper and a potential role player, it's just clear that another 150 balls is going to go Allen Robinson's way this year.
That top group, Adams, Hill, Diggs, Hopkins, Ridley, I'm going to leave AJB out of there just for a second. They're all guys that should get 150 targets, no questions asked, from at least very good quarterbacks. Maybe that's a little strong for Matt Ryan these days, but more proven quarterbacks than Fields or Dalton. But to your point, if Fields is as good as a lot of people think he could be, man, year 1, Allen Robinson, if he gets the wide receiver 1 overall, that wouldn't be the most shocking thing ever. He has the workload as those guys. We know he's at least in the same, stratosphere. I'd say same planet as them in terms of overall talent. Hey, upsides there. Someone that I've come up a little bit more on throughout the offseason. One of those guys where I move him up and I'm like, why was I even down on him in the first place? Allen Robinson, great football. Please get the guy a wide receiver 1. I can't watch him be Andre Johnson his whole career.
For real. And you know who kind of has that upside that people don't really talk about that this year? Like last year when, shout out to me, I called Davante Adams as the wide receiver 1 and wrote that article back in July prior to the season. And by the way, great to reread the comments on that one, or the replies to the tweet. Like the reason that I went out there and said that is like that the unique confluence of events that pushed Michael Thomas up to that status in 2019 were all clearly present for Adams in 2020. And it's basically like a 3-pillared approach. It's number 1, you're going to get a dominant target share within your own offense. Number 2, you got to be tethered to an efficient quarterback. Like again, Matt Ryan, Calvin Ridley, sort of the same comparison there. And number 3, you have to be verifiably great at the game. Does Keenan Allen, Terry McLaurin, but does Keenan Allen not also check all 3 of those boxes as well? Like, he's going to get a huge target share there because he's just such a stud, which again, check number 3 there. He's verifiably good at the game. They only have Austin Eckler and Mike Williams as guys that are going to command targets in that offense. You know, players like Josh Palmer or Jared Cook or Donald Parham, like we'll see, those guys should definitely fill in as role players, but Allen should see a really healthy target share. And again, tethered to Justin Herbert, who we all expect to be on this huge upward trajectory after a great rookie year. Like Keenan Allen kind of has all the variables that you would, expect out of a quote surprise wide receiver 1 overall season. McLaurin definitely has that if Fitzpatrick can be efficient this year, but like, and I'm in on Fitzpatrick. I'm totally a Fitzpatrick guy, but would you not say for sure that like Justin Herbert definitely much more reliable at this point than Ryan Fitzpatrick is? I feel like those variables are in place for Keenan Allen, but he's not quite getting the excitement around Robinson and Justin Fields, that tandem. Obviously, I'm totally 100% in on Terry McLaurin, but I kind of think Keenan Allen is just a boring pick this year, but might have much more upside than people think.
He's my overall wide receiver 6. So I think that's why I didn't.
Oh, let's go.
I'm already there. I was looking down the list past him to see where we're at. 12.2 targets per game with Herbert under center last year in the non-injury shortened games. Like, look, per game stats are definitely better than totals, but even then we got to do a little more digging sometimes for the Keenan Allens, the Diontae Johnsons of the world, where they came in, they got 2 targets and they left. Yeah, Keenan Allen all day, man, twice on Sundays. And what a great transition to our next guy, the main event, Diontae Johnson. Matt, like maybe the 2 things that pissed me off the most this offseason are people penalizing Diontae Johnson for drops and pretending like the Browns are better off without OBJ. We'll get to that second topic here in a minute. But right now for Diontae Johnson, please tell the people that this man is a number 1 wide receiver, poised for even more greatness in 2021.
Yeah, Diontae Johnson led all receivers in success rate versus zone coverage last year. He was number 7 in success rate versus man coverage, 95th percentile. All-time reception perception history was his success rate versus man coverage score last year. And before the people out there just say he's a little bunny hop receiver, just running the slants, I agree. They definitely used him a lot on those like little layup plays, but I think they were using him that way as an extension of the running game. Number 1, targets are earned. Like guys don't just throw the football to guys because it's a random type of thing. Like he's getting those targets because Ben Roethlisberger thinks he's good. But the Patriots offense used to do this all the time. They would like use Julian Edelman as an extension of the running game when they didn't really have a good ground and pound attack. And there was almost no worse running game than imaginable than what the Steelers were feeding last year. So I think that was kind of the reason they used him on those plays. But when you look at his route charts on receptionperception.com, he is above the NFL average on every single route but 2, the corner route and the comeback route. Other than that, total green all the way above average success rate because he can separate short, deep, intermediate. And that deep part is part of his game. Again, maybe the targets weren't there because of the way they were designing the offense last year, but he is absolutely a guy that can win all over the field, can beat press coverage, can beat man coverage, and I think is a true number 1 receiver. Like if he didn't have I don't care about stats like yards per target or something like that. Like you're inherently welcoming in the variable of the quarterback and the offense around him. That's why I do reception perception, is to isolate the wide receiver from those variables. And when you look at him from that lens, when you look at it, just his ability to separate all over the field, we know drops aren't a sticky statistic. So and again, no one holds drops against like DK Metcalf or AJ Brown or, DJ Moore last year. We all agree those are like young, promising receivers. Diontae's on that same trajectory to me. All the other variables just kind of have to catch up along with him.
That's what it feels like to me, man. Just selective, like stat picking only for Diontae. Most drops over the past 2 years: Metcalf, Gallup, Diontae, Tyreek, Diggs, and Evans. We never hear that when we're talking about those guys. It reminds me of, some of the running backs where people will be like, oh, we fade Mixon and Najee Harris because they're offensive lines, without paying any mind to Christian McCaffrey and Dalvin Cook having bad ones. Then, hey, if I don't think either of those metrics are something we should be hanging our hat on, but if you're going to consider it with one guy, we need to do it with the rest. So fantastic 100%. Stuff, Matt. I'm just curious, where do you have Diontae ranked? I've had him wide receiver 16. I think I flirted with 15 earlier this offseason, but for me, every time in the top 20, I almost had to stop myself in some best balls because he'd always be there for me. I'm like, hold on, wait one more round and he'll still be there.
I have him in my fourth tier of receivers, which is alongside guys from like wide receiver 20 to wide receiver 23, Brandon Aiyuk, Julio Jones, Adam Thielen, and then Diontae Johnson there right along with Odell Beckham. And that's like my favorite tier of guys to draft when you get into like that 5th to 6th round range. And man, yeah, I think Diontae, you could easily, if the quarterback position was completely like not a question, I would be totally comfortable putting him inside the top 15. But, I do have to adjust a little bit for Ben there from a fantasy angle. But yeah, I have no problem. Like in the 5th round when Deontay's on the board, I've got no problem taking him there.
Fair points all around. Let's talk about OBJ. He said is in that tier. When I had my, rankings compared to ADP, and we sent out a cool tweet about it, the 4 wide receivers I was highest on: Michael Thomas pre-injury. Damn. Yeah. OBJ, Diontae, and then Devontae Smith, who I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit later. But for me, with OBJ, this guy was the wide receiver 19 before he got hurt last year. I know he's not getting the Giants' target totals, but we don't even have to draft him at that value like he used to be. I still think even if the prime number 100% version of OBJ isn't there, if we can just get 90% of that guy with the best version of Baker Mayfield, Matt, I still think there might be a wide receiver 1 somewhere in Cleveland.
Yeah, I kind of feel as if the Giants version of Odell Beckham, who, by the way, I think was a legendary talent, on a Hall of Fame trajectory. I don't know if I'm willing to hold out hope that we ever see that again, right? Because there's been so many lower body injuries, and unfortunately we have another injury question this year. Maybe that's just sort of started to take its toll because, when you look at Beckham from his Giants days, he still owns 2 of the top 4 success rate versus man coverage scores ever recorded in reception perception, over the 98th percentile success rate versus press, every single charted season from his Giants days. He was, again, the best of the best back then. And then he gets to Cleveland, and all of his RP success rates just crater in that 2019 season. I'm sure we probably talked about it on the podcast last year. And then you were sort of kind of heading into 2020. You had to ask yourself, well, was that just a 1-year blip, or was he just not healthy, or what's the deal there? I tended to fall on the path that he probably was not healthy in 2019. And I think he kind of came out and proved that in 2020 with a 91st percentile success rate versus man coverage, 94th against press. Again, those aren't his legendary scores of old, but those are very good numbers. I think from an individual route running separation basis, Odell Beckham was very good last year. And I don't buy into the narrative, as you mentioned at all, that Baker Mayfield and Odell Beckham just can't figure it out chemistry wise. I think it's just been coincidence that they haven't popped off together. It wasn't as if the second Odell Beckham left the lineup last year, Baker Mayfield was just chucking 5 touchdowns a game. It didn't really happen like that. It was later on when Baker got comfortable in the offense, then things were working well. I think Beckham can be a part of that solution. The best offensive performance Cleveland had perhaps all last year was when Beckham was at the centerpiece against the Dallas Cowboys. It was against the Cowboys. Everybody had great games against the Cowboys, but nevertheless, I think that Beckham can be part of the solution there. And, again, I think based on his 2020 RP limited sample there, but that was so encouraging. It's just, again, it's a shame we have another injury question heading into this year. But yeah, if we get even just a 2020, not the prime Giants version of Odell Beckham, but just a 2020 version of Beckham back again, layered on top of this already very efficient Browns offense, I think he's a lock to outkick his draft cost this year.
Yeah, you tweet out some Beckham highlights and people will be at your neck talking about how they only came against the Cowboys. You send out a CeeDee Lamb catch in training camp, though, and everyone is just thrilled. Yeah, people, again, it's just about the ADP here. I'm not even telling you to go back to believing OBJ is going to be Giants OBJ. Last year, he was a PPR wide receiver 12 off the board. 2018, he could have been a top 5 guy. If you ranked him wide receiver 1 going to that first year, I wouldn't necessarily, 2019, if you would have done that, wouldn't have blamed you. This year, wide receiver 27. OBJ, wide receiver 3 in this economy. Buy him up, everybody. Let's talk some rookies, Matt. We got Jamar Chase, Devontae Smith, consensus top 2 fantasy receivers. Bit of a free fall. Jalen Waddle, Elijah Moore, Rondale Moore, Terrence Marshall. All these guys are kind of going in that wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5 range. Out of that last group, Waddle, Moore, Marshall, maybe there's another rookie you like. Is there someone that just really you think could have a chance to come in and make a day 1 impact?
Yeah, for me, it's Elijah Moore. And, as long as he gets healthy, I love that Zach Wilson's actually been playing well in preseason, because that was kind of the biggest question for me was what's the Jets, quarterback situation going to look like? Because Elijah Moore, man, I do think this guy is just a rocket ship. I think he's a superstar in the making. 95th percentile success rate versus man coverage as a collegiate player. Also showed pretty well against press coverage and extremely limited looks because they line him so much as a slot receiver. But I think he can hack it outside. And I think he's on that Tyler Lockett potential trajectory where he would be a weapon from the slot, but actually be a really good outside receiver when they ask him to do that as well. And there are moments where you're watching Elijah Moore and you can't help but think of early career Antonio Brown, his early days with the Steelers when he was just getting open all over the field, but also just so dynamic after the catch in the open field and had this, insane way of plucking the ball out of the air and then transitioning immediately to being a yak threat. That's the part, not even just the route running, but that's the part that really, really reminds me of Antonio Brown, those early Steelers days when he was just starting to come onto the scene. So I really find myself just believing in this player as a future number 1 receiver potentially. And I like Corey Davis in drafts this year too. I've been ahead of Corey Davis literally all offseason. I'm not a huge Corey Davis fan as a player, but when you go down the list of these Jets receivers, everybody's freaking out about, man, Denzel Mims playing with the 3rd team, Keelan Cole. We didn't realize this guy was actually a pretty good player. Jamison Crowder gets re-signed. It's the one guy that we know, and even Elijah Moore, all the hype, there's still the injury question that he eventually got dinged up with. The guy that's been there all the time, that's going to be out there for pretty much every snap and get a boatload of targets, that's Corey Davis. And he goes in the 50s, sometimes at wide receiver. So I've been buying both Moore and Davis this year. But yeah, among the rookies, the second tier of rookies, third tier of rookies, it's definitely Elijah Moore for me.
For me, it's Waddle, Fuller, both. They're both cheap enough to get them. Davis, Moore, same thing, particularly like you said with Zach Wilson. I don't know. Maybe he'll be the next big rookie quarterback. Even if he's not, he at least looks capable of enabling at least 1 or 2 wide receivers. Not that cost, man. Sign me up. Yeah, Elijah Moore, first time. I don't watch enough college football as I should. I'm working on it, people. But we can't take away Saturday and Sunday from the family every.
I'm right there with you, buddy. I don't watch almost a second of college football during the regular season because it's tough to sell that to the fiance. I'm going to basically ignore you and everybody all Sunday. Absolutely. But that's for work. I can't then be what, I'm doing that for pleasure too on Saturday.
I'll try to fight for my Buckeye game. But yeah, other than that, I'm just catching, a spare one here or there. I did remember seeing everyone freaking out on Twitter. So I turned on an Ole Miss game and there's Lane Kiffin chucking his clipboard up to the heaven.
Throwing that clipboard up. Yeah.
Every time Elijah Moore is running away from the defense yet again. So yeah, just out, yourself and plenty of other, I think Josh Norris, another one. A lot of people who do grind the film and just know a lot about some of these prospects when they're coming out. I've heard a lot of positives for Elijah Moore, and it was hitting that way throughout training camp too, man. He had this injury. It could almost be a blessing in disguise, similar to Devontae Smith and just not having their ADP skyrocket because Elijah is expected to come back, play in week 3 of the preseason against the Eagles. If we get one of those big plays, man, or anything resembling Corey Davis's target rate, I think we're going to see that ADP skyrocket. Matt, we talked about Allen Robinson a little bit earlier. Great player. No one's disputing that. Just the situation maybe could hold him back. What about DJ Moore? Because as much as I love him as a player, I just don't think Sam Darnold is going to be more than an average quarterback in Carolina. Maybe it doesn't matter. Joe Brady's there. Great system. We got other talent around him. We'll see what happens. It's one of the most interesting storylines going into the year. How do you feel about DJ Moore this year? And do you think he's good enough to win out and be that featured wide receiver one, despite being in an overall meh environment?
Yeah, definitely a meh environment. And I feel like that's kind of been the case for DJ Moore basically throughout his career. Like there's been one variable or another that just hasn't always been there. But I actually give DJ Moore a lot of credit as one of the, a lot of times for folks that are new to reception perception, like a lot of times the metrics that these guys come in with as rookies or early on, they stay pretty stable. But every now and again, there are guys like Kenny Golladay is a good example, and DJ Moore perhaps even a better example of guys that just take like a steady 5% growth like throughout each individual season. Moore is definitely one of those guys who was not a great route runner early on in his career, but I think last year showed that ability to not just win on slants and flats and, some of those shorter routes that he was doing early on in his career, digs, everything like that, really start to win on deep patterns as well. And like the Panthers actually threw to him deep. He had a really high ADOT last year, which I don't think anybody expected. We expected Robbie Anderson to be that guy. Yeah. Weirdly, it was DJ Moore. And, maybe that flips a little more this year. I actually think that the Panthers, similar to what I said about the Cowboys, I think the Panthers moving their receivers around a bit more probably would have been a good idea last year, would definitely be a good idea this year. But I think DJ Moore is really developing into a really high quality receiver. It is just the environment, as you mentioned. I mean, Robbie Anderson's good. Robbie Anderson is going to command volume. Terrace Marshall, love Terrace Marshall. And he looks like a guy that is going to be knocking on the door, like commanding the ball as well. It's just tough to throw the targets all around there. And again, the fact that we're going to get it probably inefficient quarterback play again this year might lead to just similar results for these guys as it was last year, which is some pretty good yardage totals at the end of the year, not great in the touchdown column. And some, because of that, some very variation within their weekly production. And, obviously Mike Davis had a pretty decent receiving role last year. Chris McCaffrey's going to have a bigger receiving role when he's out there this year too. So that could, I don't mind DJ Moore when he gets to like the end of the fifth. Like if he falls there, and in some drafts I've done this year, he will go in that range. Like if he falls towards like the Brandon Aiyuk or Diontae Johnson tier, like I'm definitely willing to take him there because I believe in the player and believe that he is the wide receiver one in Carolina, and their actions will soon speak to that when they extend DJ Moore. But yeah, to me, I don't have questions about the player, but it is a tough environment.
Been hard to get behind the top 20 valuation. Robbie outscored him last year. That could easily happen again. You lost Curtis. Marshall is not guaranteed to take a big back step from that target total. And to your point,
yeah,
the most target hog running back in the entire league is back. So not looking good. One fun storyline to watch. Will DJ Moore, for the third straight season, finish with exactly 1,215 yards from scrimmage and 4 touchdowns? We'll see.
Unbelievable.
You got the Alvin Kamara 83 reception streak now going on. A little bit different for DJ. It just sucks, man. I did an article earlier this offseason, most unlucky receivers in the NFL. We have some cool uncatchable targets metrics back in PFF Ultimate and all that fun stuff. The two main guys, DJ Moore and Jerry Jeudy. Unfortunately, Jerry Jeudy got it last year with Drew Lock. Now he's getting Teddy. We'll see. I do think Teddy over Drew is, of course, an upgrade. You can look at every single statistic other than big time throws. Teddy is a superior quarterback. So I would say Teddy is good news for Jeudy. But once again, it's just like DJ Moore and just like Andy Dalton, through gritted teeth. Like, okay, we got Teddy Bridgewater in Denver now.
Yeah, great.
How do you feel about Jeudy? Because, similar to Diontae, we had the drops, similar to Diontae and some of these other guys we've talked about. Whole lot of goodness in the route running department as well. Is he someone that you're just anticipating being able to overcome this rather porous situation?
Yeah, I think the route running is absolutely there with Jeudy. He could definitely be a little bit better in some contested situations. Like I have more questions from like a ball tracking hands perspective with Jerry Jeudy than I do with Diontae Johnson. But no like questions to push him down enough. Like the separation was there as a rookie. Reception perception profile, very good. Third among rookies last year in success rate versus man coverage, trailing only Justin Jefferson and Brandon Aiyuk. And I think the fact that there's some clarity at the wide receiver position, because like the reports about Cortland Sutton's rehab are still kind of like, and we don't want in August. We want like full field positivity, when it comes to injury status. There's been just some pessimism around Cortland Sutton there and that recovery from an ACL injury that was almost a calendar year ago. So that's not great. But I think Jeudy by hook or by crook will end up being the number one receiver in Denver this year. And that's probably good if the target total is more constricted to his direction, because I think the problem with saying that, well, listen, Teddy Bridgewater supported 3 top 25 receivers in Carolina last year, and a pretty good running back in Mike Davis catching the ball, is like, yeah, he was having to do that with the Panthers defense last year, kind of being forced into pass heavy situations. Denver is almost certainly going to be a top 5 defense this year. So Bridgewater, I think, could be a little bit more conservative, even more conservative than he usually is. Like conservative with a good defense behind him, like 2 pretty good running backs there, Melvin Gordon, and especially rookie Javonte Williams. Like, I don't know that there's going to be enough passing volume for Jeudy, Sutton, and Noah Fant, who's going off the board as a top 10 tight end, with guys like KJ Hamler, who's a legit sleeper, and Tim Patrick, who pops every time that he gets on the field. I don't know that there's going to be enough passing volume there in Denver for Sutton, Jeudy, and Fant to all hit ADP. The guy, though, I'm most confident in is definitely Jerry Jeudy.
Yeah, he definitely should be the one, but we keep seeing the Teddy enabled 3 top 24 wide receivers last year. Great. It's a brand new offense with a much better defense. And he hasn't thrown for more than 15 touchdowns in a single season.
Yeah. Oh, the defense is the biggest difference between what they were doing with Carolina last year. We know they went full blown, rebuild the defense. They spent all their damn draft picks on defense last year. I think Denver is fully locked and loaded and just added another great corner in addition to all the other corners they added in the offseason. So they're just very, very different environments to me. I don't really care one bit what Teddy did with the receivers in Carolina last year. Just like you said, totally different environment.
I will say though, people, if you can snag Jeudy, maybe he falls to around 7, you're in an 8 or 10 man league or something like that, falls down there, you get that keeper tag on him. What if Mr. Aaron Rodgers makes his way to Denver next year?
Right.
That would be something, man, for all 3 of those guys. I know we've talked about it all off season, but there just literally isn't a better landing spot.
No.
All right, Matt. Again, we talked about your reception perception stuff, all podcasts. Again, people, receptionperception.com. Who do you really think are the NFL's top tier of route runners, though? And I'm not just saying 2020, first, second, third percentile. Just in your opinion, I'm not saying Mount Rushmore. I don't want to rip off part of my take. Top 3, top 5, whatever list you got, who do you consider to be in that upper echelon top tier of route runners in the NFL?
Yeah, so I think the top 3, just based on, by the way, the king of this would have been Antonio Brown in his prime. He from reception perception standpoint. And for the first time ever, actually, you can access historical RP data on the website, receptionperception.com, if you sign up for the highest tier. So you can go back and see AB was always up there, basically when he played in his prime. So he would have been that guy. But right now, I think it has to start with Stephon Diggs, Davante Adams, and Keenan Allen. Those are I feel the only 3 legitimate answers. Other than that, I feel you're kind of at a stretch. Michael Thomas does kind of deserve mention too, because he's posted really great scores throughout his career. But I think from a full field domination perspective, we're looking at Diggs, Adams and Keenan Allen as those guys. The next group of players, I think you'd put in that same range. That's when you start looking at, you're already Justin Jefferson or Calvin Ridley or Tyreek Hill, who I mentioned earlier. Terry McLaurin absolutely deserves to be mentioned in that group based on his first 2 seasons. He's knocking on that door. But yeah, I think if we're talking top 3, no doubt about it, to me, I think it begins and ends and really is only a legitimate discussion if you're adding Diggs, Davante Adams, or Keenan Allen.
I love Keenan Allen cracking the list. I was lucky enough. I got to interview Mike Williams on this podcast earlier this summer. And I asked him if, because I asked him about Keenan. I was like, that route running is so crazy. Some of his releases, it reminds me of Stevie Johnson to an extent. And they did overlap for 1 year. And Mike straight up came out and was like, oh yeah, we watch Stevie Johnson film all the damn time. Do you ever go back and chart his, I know that was 2011, 12 was his best years, but do you ever chart Stevie stuff?
Yes. Yeah. No, I have one of his seasons in the historical database. And funny enough that you mentioned that, because I always thought what an unbelievable route running tandem that would have been had they really been firing off without the injuries. But yeah, he's actually a guy that is over the 90th percentile, Stevie Johnson, the season that I have for him in there. He would be someone I think that folks would be surprised to see up there. But yeah, no, I mean, he's a great mention because he was just a really underrated player for such a long time.
Hope Stevie's enjoying his retirement, just lounging out at Revis Island, only guy allowed in there. All right, Matt.
Exactly.
Great job, man. I want to do some quick hitters, 1 to 2 sentences if you can help it, and I'll just keep teeing you up. Brandon Aiyuk versus Deebo Samuel's 2021 fantasy production. Who you got?
If I haven't dropped enough hints here so far, it's 1000% Brandon Aiyuk. I think he is the next great alpha receiver in the NFL that is ready to take that step. And, whenever we get Trey Lance in there, I think that's going to boost the offensive efficiency.
A little worried about the volume, but you are right, man. Everything that dude did last year looked very high level. Do you think JuJu is worth buying low, or is he cooked?
I wouldn't say cooked, but depends on where he is next year. I think he can only operate as a slot receiver, which is why he got passed up, in the target pecking order by Diontae Johnson. There's a reason for that, I believe.
I was pleasant. He was breaking a couple tackles out there in the preseason, probably against backups, but I just want to see that part of his game again. I know he's probably not going to be, having AB on the outside, taking attention away. Just give me some semblance of the guy that we saw really just putting up crazy yak numbers. All right, we've talked about Corey Davis a little bit. You mentioned how you've, kind of been ahead of it. Do you consider him the best late round receiver, though? We'll say like rounds, 8 and on.
Yeah, no, I think that he is in that conversation. I think him and Curtis Samuel and Michael Gallup, if he gets there. And Gallup is one of those guys that has such an unbelievable variation in his draft, price based on where you're drafting. Like if you're drafting on underdog, he's going to be like a 7th round pick. If you're drafting in your home league and over the weekend, he's probably going to be undrafted maybe. So Gallup, if he fits the mold, I think would be there. But then Curtis Samuel and Corey Davis are the guys that I really like in rounds 8 to 10.
Yeah, from about an hour ago, Ron Rivera did say he's optimistic Curtis Samuel will practice next week. This dude's, nothing has changed about his projected role. It's not ideal. He's hurt, seems to be on the way coming back, and you can now get him cheaper than ever. Who is your favorite Jaguars receiver at cost right now?
Oh, Marvin Jones for sure. I have been saying all offseason that and I know he's actually just popped up on the injury report. Sounds like he's going to play week 1, whatever. But I've been saying all offseason that the ADP gap from Chark Visca to Jones, all kind of needs to close a little bit. Sure, Chark should come off the board first because he's a guy, whatever. But to me, I think Jones is the best bet at cost. I'd be zero. Would you be zero surprised?
No, that certainly could be Marvin. I almost wanted to be out on him originally. I thought last year him, really needed those extra targets once Galladay got out of the picture. But to see the actual disparity show up the way it did, just take the cheapest guy. Yeah. Marvin Jones had himself a nice preseason as well. Matt, you were fantastic, man. Really appreciate the time. Everyone can find your stuff again, receptionperception.com, writing, podcasting over at Yahoo Sports. Anything else you want to get off your chest before we get you out of here?
No, man, just I hope everybody has a good season and checks out Reception Perception. 21 season is going to be a good one, man. I'm just ready now to see all the results of all the takes we've been building all off season. I'm ready to see some actual real games now.
Absolutely. Enough with these midweek injuries that are bailing people out and this or that. Let's just get some real games going, real fantasy points going, and go get some of these dope wide receivers. He's Matt Harmon. I'm Ian Hartitz. It's been the PFF Fantasy Football Podcast. And until next time, take care, everybody.